Zev, you could start.
Rabbi Wordy, are we good to go?
Sorry, say that again?
Are we good to go?
Yeah, you're good to go. Yes, the floor is yours.
Awesome, thank you. Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us again. I got some people reach out to me via email and asked me some questions and gave me some feedback, which was really helpful at the very least, because I don't really have like the live dynamic of a live class. So I have no idea how this is going over. So I realized that I didn't specify, or I didn't share what my email was. So I'm going to share it today, and feel free to reach out to me with any questions, or if you like the class, because I want to make sure that I'm doing a good job at sharing. Okay. So I saw some questions about people not being able to share or install Illustrator. That is going to be a problem for today, because we're going to work in Illustrator and like introduce ourselves to it. So I would love to troubleshoot that, but we're not going to do it at the beginning of the class. I also realized that answering questions at the beginning of class is like it might help everybody. It might help some people. I think I'm going to do like maybe every 20 minutes check the questions, and there isn't a you are able to raise your hand in Zoom, but I can't, like, I think I'm not going to like unmute you or let you share your video unless it's like a really, really big issue. The best thing is to put it in the Q&A. So if you look at Zoom, there's a Q&A section at the bottom bar, and submit a question, and I'll look at it at some kind of like interval, maybe every 10 minutes or something. That way, I'm not always answering questions. I can focus on teaching. And then it's kind of unfortunate, but I guess that's the reality of teaching online, is that I definitely can't be two places at once. So either I'm focusing on teaching or I'm focusing on answering questions. So I think I'll answer a few questions right after I'm done this like quick introduction, and then we'll get into the work, and then I'll look at it again a few minutes later. Right. Okay, so Illustrator is necessary for this class, and if people are still on the fence about it, like the trial will still be good from this class until Tuesday night's class. So you'll have it for 2 classes, and then you can use it in between and play around with it and see if you hate it or love it. It seems that people are a little uncomfortable with the price point, and that's totally understandable, especially if your motivation for taking this course is more like a hobby and more you're curious, so you don't want to invest a lot of money up front. I want to say that if visual design is appealing to you, even as like a side career or a side job, if visual design is appealing to you as a side job, this like Illustrator is basically the tool that you need. You could probably find some workaround with a bunch of different free programs or cheaper programs or older versions or pirated versions. So I can't really discuss any of those, specifically the pirated versions, because I've never used a pirated version. I think that, I want to be a professional in my field, or I am a professional in my field. And it's a business expense. Buying Illustrator is at a business expense, and it's not a very big one considering what other businesses have to put up. Like if you want to be a visual designer, basically all you need is a computer and a program. And Adobe Illustrator is one of the basic design programs available that's the only kind of overhead you really have. And then after that, you could really, you could charge more to a client or jobs, and you can do, you know, the biggest companies use Adobe Illustrator. So I guess you could look at it as a long-term investment. If the financial aspect is still too big of a challenge, then maybe, I'm not sure, I didn't come up with a solution for that. Another problem people had was that a lot of people didn't have two screens, and therefore they had to kind of toggle between windows. So I obviously also don't have a solution for that, because that's more like a technical issue that like I can't give you a screen, and I also can't, I don't know, that just seems to be the limitation of teaching online. So it's unfortunate, and I can understand it because I've taken classes online, and it's not it's not very manageable. So what I want to do is I'm going to slow down and verbalize what I'm doing, so that if you're on another screen, you could at least follow along in some way. Okay. Let me look at some questions. Okay, someone has a question about the class ending. This was a question that came up a few times. So I didn't send out the informational email about when the class starts or ends. I was told, and I'm under the impression that it works from 8:05 to 10 p.m. With the last maybe 20 minutes, half hour focused on answering questions, like any remaining questions, and focused on, I don't know, any sort of like housekeeping activities necessary. So my understanding, it runs from 8:05 to 10 p.m. And that's it. Okay, so amazing. Okay, so someone asked what my email was. That's my email. Actually, one moment. Okay. Okay, so this is my email. I'm also going to show it at the end, so don't have to worry. You can email me your questions, your feedback. I guess have in mind, there are some things I could change. There's some things I can't. If, again, it's like a question about like online learning or related to online learning, like I guess that's just the limitation of the course. And if you have any ideas of how I could accommodate you, let me know, and I'll be happy to. So this is my email. I guess if you do, like, this is just my personal email. So if you have a question related to the course, put something in the subject line that will indicate that, so it doesn't get lost in my inbox. And also introduce yourself, because when you're writing an email, introduce yourself, because I don't really know who anyone is through Zoom. Okay, so we're using Adobe Illustrator, and I'm going to talk a little bit about Adobe Illustrator. Adobe Illustrator is what's called a vector program, and vectors have also their place in science and math, and we're not talking about that. I don't really understand those things enough to explain it. The idea of a vector is a line or a path made up of a bunch of small points. And it's mathematically based, but the main idea is that a vector could be made bigger and smaller. It could be scaled seamlessly, and the software will automatically create more information so that the thing that you are making bigger or smaller will look the same at any size that you make it. And to better understand that, I'm going to talk a little bit about raster graphics. So raster graphics are files with a set amount of squares or of little dots of color. And the limitation of raster graphics is that there's a point where they're so big and the graphic doesn't have enough information in it that you start seeing the little dots. I'm sure we can, when you see a bad photograph, it's kind of blurry and it looks like it's pixelated, right? Literally pixels, little squares of information of color. And so the difference between a raster and a vector is that the vector is made up of a bunch of points, and as it gets bigger, the relationship of those points is maintained. So what happens is that you can have a logo that's really, really small, and then you can make that same logo 10 feet high, and the idea is that it will look the same. And that's really good because that means that that's one less thing we have to think about. If you were thinking about graphics or raster graphics, you would have to make sure that your image has the right amount of information. So this is an example, right? This is what a vector image looks like, and this is what it looks like when it's rasterized, when it's broken down into little squares. And I guess this is not really a good example because what we're looking at is a vector. So it's more like has a rasterized or pixelated effect. But let's say a program like Photoshop. Photoshop is a raster a program. So it could work with vectors and you could put vectors in it. But for the most part, Photoshop was designed to work with rasters, to work with raster graphics. This is again another kind of contrast between the two. Like raster is for photos, and Illustrator or vector is for more like flat. Well, not necessarily flat graphics, but it's more like it's made up of different points. I guess this image specifically looks kind of flat. The one on the left. And okay, I'm gonna look at my notes. So right, so just again, one more point is that vector ideally can never be too big. It will never appear blurry at any size that you make it. It might, at some point, the detail might smudge together just because of our ability to interpret information at certain sizes. So if you made the image on the left really, really small, at some point it would just look black because we can't see things that small, but all the information is retained versus a raster graphic. You can make it too big. I don't know if you can, I'm not sure if it's too small, but you could definitely make it too big to a point that you can't make out what it is because the information is what it has. It's kind of locked in there. Does that make sense? Someone asked, is it possible to convert a raster image to a vector? No, but you could turn a vector image to a raster. So I don't really have an example offhand, but it's kind of like a raster image has a fixed amount of information. So, and that's like, you can't really add, you could kind of fake it, but you can't really add information to it. So it's kind of like, think of it because raster images are usually related to photography or photos. So you take a photo and that's what it is. You can't really add things to it unless you fake it. So a photograph is the information that you took with your camera, and that's it. So, well, meanwhile, a vector graphic, you could, with a vector graphic, you could kind of remove information and fix it. So it's like, okay, this is, I'm fixing the vector graphic at this scale. This is kind of theoretical and abstract, and I could definitely show you what that could look like inside of Illustrator. But I thought to first kind of talk about Okay, to first talk about the differences between programs. Again, so this is Adobe Illustrator is a vector-based program, and Adobe Photoshop is a raster-based program, and they have their different uses. And if you're editing images or kind of smashing a bunch of photos together, then Photoshop is definitely the program that you want to use. Okay, so I know we're not talking about vectors in this class, but we are raster, but we are going to, I just wanted to show you how a photo or a raster-based image has like a fixed amount of information, like we said before. And for printing, just so we know, for printing, an image or a graphic should have 300 dpi, which means dot per inch. Basically, it should be very rich with information. And as we move from the right to the left, we see that as we maintain the object size, but we remove information at 10 dpi or dots per inch, you're looking at a very wacky image. So when dealing with images, let's say you're going to be making a poster or something, you want to print it at 300 dpi. And like we said, you can't add quality to a photo or to a graphic. So if you're going to be using an image in your poster, even if you're using Illustrator, which it's still possible to use images in Illustrator, but it's not ideal, or it's not really meant for that, make sure the image itself is 300 dpi. That means that before you put it into Illustrator, you're going to make sure it has enough, like a high level of information that would render your poster to look really professional and clean when you print it. If you're using a photo that's 72 dpi or dots per inch, you can, I don't know if I'll give a demonstration today, but I guess it's just something good to know. Someone asked, can you vectorize an image in Illustrator with image trace? Yes, you can, but that also means that you're changing it from a raster to a vector. It's no longer a raster image, it's a completely different file. You can't change it back to a raster image. Okay, getting a little lost in the weeds. Okay, so what kind of things could we do in Adobe Illustrator? I just went online and I looked at artwork that was done with Adobe Illustrator. So this is something that could be done in Adobe Illustrator. Obviously, someone mentioned last class they had a concern that they don't feel that they are artistic enough. So I don't think that's something you have to be worried about. Or not being able to draw very well, but obviously these are done by someone who can draw very well. There's no like magic, there's no magic tool in Adobe Illustrator to make great looking illustrations, but this is an example of the level of information that you could include into an illustration in Adobe Illustrator. This was work done by a company called Telegram Paper Company. I just like mentioning who did the work. One, because I think that like people put a lot of work into this, so they should, even if we're just looking at it on a slide, so they deserve the credit. And in addition, I think it's really good if, let's say someone in the class really loved this, they could go look it up and be inspired. Another thing that Adobe Illustrator is great for and that I use a lot for is logos. This is logos made by Chabad. Well, he's a designer who's a Chabad guy, and he designs a lot of logos. His name is Yossi Belkin. And as we can see, it's very great for having clean edges, also fuzzy edges, but in this example, we're looking at clean edges, we're looking at fonts, we're looking at flat images, and Adobe Illustrator is terrific for that. So I guess it's good to know, like we spoke about with a design problem, understanding where your work is going to live in, knowing what kind of work you're doing will tell you what kind of program you should be using. So let's say you're doing illustrations, something with a lot of illustrations, something like a logo design project, or something with a lot of kind of detail, like the logo on the bottom right. Illustrator is the program to use. And finally, this is like 2 pieces of typography that I found online. And interestingly enough, fonts, you could kind of tell based on what we're talking about, fonts are usually, well, fonts are, I believe, almost always vector files. So they're not just like a folder with a bunch of pieces in it, right? It's more like a really lo-fi piece of software. That's what a font is, but it's based on vectors, which is why you can make a font big and small really easily. And there's not going to be a point where a font becomes pixelated. I think that's true. Yeah, I don't think I made that up. Okay, so when we're learning a new program, well, when we're learning something new, it could be really overwhelming and it could be really scary. And I remember when I first started learning Illustrator and Photoshop and a bunch of other programs, it was kind of intimidating. There's so many options and so many tools and capabilities. And these programs were really designed by coders and developers who were more like interested in adding in a bunch of capabilities into the program. And they weren't like, I guess this might just be my own like narrative, but my understanding is that they're more concerned about making the program as robust and as dynamic and flexible as possible. And as the users, as the people using it, we kind of have to learn it. We are like, if we want to benefit from this program, we have to put in the work and learn it. So there's definitely a learning curve. Just learning curve. Ta-da. So, right, if you look at the image here, a learning curve, you start with 0, and if you put in the work, you will, don't look at any of the other learning curves, too distracting, but it's a slow and steady progression building on what you know, building on the information you know, until at some point you've reached like a plateau, you've reached a place where you're mostly comfortable with like 80% of what you're doing. So shortcuts are a really great way to gain confidence quickly. Shortcuts is using combinations of like buttons on your keyboard and your mouse. You can access a lot of the kind of like the basic tools. So there's so many tools, there's no way that there's a shortcut for everything. But a lot of the basic tools are available to you just by learning a combination of keys. And that way you don't have to really think about everything that you're doing and navigate to every single window. And that is kind of a way to work quickly. And I think it's good to kind of put the effort in beforehand. So I'm going to teach you a few shortcuts as I do them. And I'm also going to, at the end of class, I'm going to share a kind of just a file from Adobe, actually, that says all of the different shortcuts. And I suggest just going through it and trying it out even once and kind of getting a feel for what it's like to use shortcuts. Because at some point it becomes like muscle memory, and then your creative process can kind of flow through your fingers in a really fun way. Someone asked if I could send the slide. I could send the slide. I will do that after class. This is really great, I think. Yeah. Okay, so one more time, this is the end of the slides. This is my email. Feel free to reach out to me. Again, make sure to put something in the subject line, because if it's just a random email from a name I don't recognize without a subject line, I might just think it's spam, or I might just ignore it or overlook it, not on purpose, just because there are lots of spam going to my email. So yes, I would love your feedback, constructive criticism, ideas, questions. Feel free to reach out. Okay. So, okay. Okay, so I'm going to start with Adobe Illustrator. And at this point, if you don't have it installed, I guess you can just pay attention and try to recreate it when it works, when you do have it installed. It's not a very complicated process. I really don't think you should worry about it. And if you still have questions afterwards, again, feel free to ask me. Okay, so we're going to open it by double clicking. And so this is when it should open. Okay. Guess. Ooh. Sorry, I'm using two screens. Okay, so let's do this. Oh, sorry. Okay, so this is what I'm presented with, a bunch of projects. And great. So this is kind of like the blank screen. And you can see all the way on the left, there's a create new button. There's also an open button, which means that you can open projects that you've been working on before. This is pretty cool. Adobe has kind of like these step-by-step tips. Excuse me, step-by-step tips for like they'll show you around and like really basic tutorials. And I definitely recommend going through them. It comes with the program, so you don't have to pay for it. Okay, so the program has a couple of presets and a couple of default stuff. And this is where you would find the projects that you were working on before. Sometimes what will happen is if you move a project from a different folder, it will open here. It will appear here, but you won't be able to open it. So it doesn't mean your program is broken. Let me just move that. Okay, so I want you to hit Control or Command N or create new, right? So we're going to hit that. Okay, so this is like the first kind of create document screen. So we have a bunch of different formats. We have mobile, which means like phone, designing for like phone, like app interfaces. We have web, print, film, video, yada, yada. We're going to use print. And it's when you use print, it doesn't mean like these are all, you could change everything we're going to do in this specific like new document screen. But it's kind of just a default size. And yeah, okay, so say view all presets there. So templates, I've never used these before, but it might be fun to play around with kind of preset work. So we are going to make a tabloid. And so I wanted to make one more point, which was that in Illustrator, it uses something called points, right? We spoke about how a vector is made about a bunch of points. So it's called points or PT. And there's a relationship between, if we go to the right kind of drop down under preset details. Someone said when you press Control N, nothing happens. Then you can click Create New on the far left. See Create New, it's on top of Open. It will give you the same result, and maybe something going on with your keyboard. Okay, so we want to create a tabloid, and we want the orientation to be landscape. Oh, so what? That is weird. Okay, if you click on this drop down where it says points, you'll see a bunch of different sizes. You don't see it on my screen. I think it's because I'm using it on a second screen and it's a little glitchy, I guess. And it will show you like points, pixels, inches, yada, yada, yada. We're going to use points for now. It's really simple. So I'm going to call this, geometric grid pattern. I like to name things this way. So I'm kind of, let's say the client is, let's say this is a client job. And let's go CHYE. And then I'm, okay. CHYE, and then, I don't know, poster. And this is good because let's say I was working with CHYE and I had a bunch of different, deliverables or things that we're handing off to them. So I like to just write poster in big, so it kind of sticks out. Someone said, you don't have a choice of tabloid. So when you go click on print, new document, you see recent saved mobile web print. And then there's going to be a little button that says load more presets. And then you will see tabloid right here. Okay. And color's different. I didn't realize that it would be glitchy on a second screen. Okay, so I'm going to hit create. Amazing. Let me stop this just for 1 second. Okay, awesome. Okay, so this is our workspace. This is what Illustrator will look like, blank canvas. So we're going to familiarize ourselves a little bit with the interface, and we're not going to learn everything. And I'm going to run through like a practice project. Okay, so first to understand is that Illustrator works with something called an artboard. An artboard is a control shift O to show you. It's basically like a space, like the bounds of your artwork. And you could put anything anywhere over here, right? You can zoom all the way out. I think there's some kind of like fixed size, right? You can work all the way over here. This area already is like dead man's zone. Like you can't design anything here, but you have all this space to design. But what Illustrator does is give you this kind of frame. And again, imagine this is a poster. You are going to only be able to print this area. You're not going to be printing this massive, massive area. I think I explained that correctly. Okay. So we have this document, and on the left we have a bunch of tools, a bunch of tools, and on the right we have more like graphic properties, which means that on the left we can for the most part we'll be like creating stuff with the things on the left, and on the right we'll be editing the things that we created. So that's a good way to understand. And then on top of that, there's another bar of information that usually appears. Right. Okay, so I'm going to hit, so first let's learn some basic tools. This little black arrow that I have right here is called the selection tool. It's like the basic arrow tool, right? And then if you hit A or you hit this little, so it looks like a white arrow, right? Compared to this looks like a white arrow. A white arrow is a direct selection tool, which means that this is pretty much used for selecting any property, and it has like a very general way of selecting things. The direct selection tool has a very direct way of editing things. So you can select very specific points. So let me show you. And if you don't understand what I'm doing, I'll explain it later. So I have a box, right? And with my selection tool, I can just drag the box and not really change anything. But when I hit A or I click the white arrow, then I can select the specific corners of the box and I can edit them, right? Or I select two specific corners of the box and I can edit those. Okay, I hope that seems pretty simple. Then another thing I can do is I can hit P or the pen tool, which is the furthest left. That's going to be a little confusing. Hit P, and you'll see this kind of like inkwell pen with a little asterisk next to it. And this is like a huge tool for Illustrator, right? Because we spoke about points. So the pen tool is literally the way for you to make custom points. So you start clicking around, and you click around just by clicking at a space and letting go, and you can pretty much do this forever. And I'm deleting by hitting delete as long as they're selected. Someone said those two columns aren't there yet. So that's fine. I'm going to talk about workspaces in a second. But first, I think just hit P and click around for a bit. And another thing that the pen tool does is that it responds to how you drag. So while just clicking from point to point creates a straight line, clicking and then dragging creates a curve. And sometimes the program will try to anticipate the next curve you will make, right? See how I don't have to do anything to get this curve? That's because the artificial intelligence of the program, the software, is predicting, oh, you made this degree of a curve, means that you want to do, I don't know, you want to kind of respond, you want to mirror that with another degree of curve. So that might be helpful sometimes. Okay, right, so I'm making a really ugly circle. And I'm just clicking around and dragging, clicking around and dragging. Your shape does not have to look anything like this. And then when I go to the starting point, I see a little, you can't really see it that well, but I don't know, can you see that? There's like a little circle that appears next to it. This indicates that I'm closing a shape, right? So while this is an open path or an open shape, and it's just line after line after line, when I go back to the starting point, I create a closed shape. And that means different things for what I could do when I edit. Okay, so let me move this. Someone said yours doesn't come black inside. That's not a problem. That's fine for right now. Okay, so if you go to the top right little area, next you'll see like a search bar next to where you can close out the program. And you see a little light bulb, which is the tips that I mentioned about. You can access that just by clicking it, right? And you hit that little X when you want to close it. So switch workspaces. So there are different kinds of workspaces, which means they will make certain tools. It won't delete anything. Everything is 100% accessible, no matter what kind of workspace you're in. But it kind of optimizes it. So it says, oh, you know, you want to do painting. Here's like the basic tools you need for painting and the basic editing capabilities you need for painting. But you can make your own workspace. You can edit a workspace really, really easily. So I'm in Essentials Classic. So that would be a way, and I'm pretty sure I already edited my workspace in some way. Let's say click on Essentials, right? So now I'm seeing something else completely. And nothing really changed that I can't change back. I could go to Window, and Window is a chance for me to include any sort of area or any sort of window that I was missing. And all I have to do, let me redo that. I think I did that a little too quickly. So I'm going to click on brushes. Okay, I'm in the Window tab on the top left. There's a bunch of drop-down menus, and one of them is called Window. And I'm going to click on brushes. That's just one of the options. It's alphabeticalized. Alphabeticized. Okay, so I have this kind of floating box, and if I click on the top, I can drag it around wherever I want. And this is, let's say, right, it's a window, it's a floating window. And I can move it around just by dragging on the top. I could adjust the height of the window by dragging on the bottom. If you look closely, oh, that doesn't change. If you look closely, you see like a little bit of a texture, a couple of lines right next to each other. And that allows me to make it bigger and maybe see more options if I wanted to. But also there's a scroll bar, so I could see those options regardless. But when it comes to customizing, windows could be, and this is only windows. I don't think you're able to, yeah, we'll get to that in a second. So if you want to kind of lock in a window, you go over to the right side and you'll see a blue line appear. And that indicates that, hey, you're about to drop this window. It's going to lock it in there. And these are kind of small, but if you look at the top of all of these windows, you'll see these little like double arrows. And depending on where they're facing, it indicates if it's going to collapse a series of windows or expand them. So the same thing with the toolbar on the left. If you click those double arrows, you will see more tools or less tools. Right, and then to reverse what I just said, I could, let's say, grab on brushes, and now again, it's a floating window. And I can exit out actually and remove it from my windows, from my workspace. So I don't see it, but I can always reintroduce it really easily by clicking on brushes in the drop-down Windows panel. And this way I can customize my space. So if you don't see, if you don't see what I have, you can easily adjust that. So I'm going to go back to Essentials Classic because that's what I'm more comfortable with. But I also want to say that have fun kind of exploring the different workspaces, right? This is, what's this one? Printing and proofing. So this would be built for getting something ready to send to the printer and making sure that everything is good for ready to go to be printed at a commercial printer. Okay, so if you hit M, or if you go to the far left, there's a rectangle, you could make rectangle, right? And this purple or really magenta line indicates that you're making a perfect, you're making a geometric, I don't know if that's a correct way to phrase it. You're making a shape with equal proportions on all sides. So it will only appear when you're about to set a shape to have equal proportions. So right here, it's a rectangle, here it's a rectangle, but here it's a square. And that's something called smart guides. Illustrator has a feature which you could turn on or off, that will give you information about the actions that you're doing. So you could squeeze it this way, squeeze it that way. Another thing you can do is when you hold Shift, How do I get your white page into black? Okay, if you lost your artboard, so two things may have happened. First, hit Control-0, and you may have just wandered off into kind of the workspace away from your artboard. Another thing you may have done is deleted it by accident, and so then you would hit Shift-O. You would hit Shift-O, and just make any shape at all. Just click and drag and let go, and then on the top left, you will see still within like Shift-O, Shift-O, right? So you can hit Escape to get out of Shift-O, but you hit Shift-O again, and now you are in kind of the artboard mode, and then you can go to the top left area. You will see a drop down that says Custom, kind of next to the little people, and then you have all of these different preset options. You can hit Letter, you can select Legal, which is a different dimension, and then Tabloid. But as you can see, our orientations are different. So you can easily change that by right next to that drop-down menu, there's an option to hit Portrait and an option to hit Landscape. So there you go. I just replicated an artboard. Okay, so now I made a square, or I can hit M again and make a rectangle. But I want variety. I'm going to make a circle. So I hit L, or I can right click on that far left area where we saw that rectangle, and you'll see a lot of other shapes. So we're gonna make a circle. I'm gonna hit L, and I'm going to click and drag and hold Shift. So that's click and drag, hit L, click, well, hold Shift, click, drag, and you will have a perfect circle, right? Or you cannot hold Shift and kind of get any kind of a ellipse with any kind of dimension, with any proportions. So kind of put that next to each other. Organize it. So we can make other shapes, a polygon with a click and drag. Sometimes when you hold Shift, it also keeps it, right? So when you hold Shift, it can keep kind of the shape. If you see this kind of blue outline, you see how it's kind of like all over the place. When I hit Shift, it writes itself so that, I'm not perfectly sure. It usually, what usually happens is that it's like a very geometric and symmetrical orientation, but it locks in that. Okay, so you can do all kinds of shapes in that area. The pen tool. Now I want to go back to the pen tool for a second because I think it's pretty useful tool. So I'm clicking and then I'm dragging to make these kind of curves. And maybe I don't like what I did. So what I could do is I'm still like hit P, and then either I can hover over a point, or it's called an anchor point, or let's see. Right, or just hover over it and it deletes it automatically, or I hover over it, it deletes it. That's not what happened here. Or I could just hit, you hit A to get the direct selection tool. Remember we said that A is the ability to select specific points. I hit delete and it deletes those points. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more. So we're going to hit M again to I'm going to hit M, and then I'm going to hit Shift and continue to drag to make a square. And when I want to make a square bigger or smaller, but I want to keep it as a square, which means that the square isn't locked at being a square. I can really drag the sides just by hovering over the sides and hovering over that little white square at the center or at the corners to change the dimensions or proportions of the square. So if I hit Shift, it will scale the shape at a kind of an equal ratio so that I'm keeping that shape, but it's at a different size. I can do that again. I'm hitting P for the pen tool. I'm clicking and I'm dragging, and now I have this weird organic shape. And again, I hit Shift and it keeps its proportions just at a bigger scale. So I think I covered, I did not cover everything. We are not Illustrator masters. But what I want to do is I want to get our very basic skills into some kind of practice. So I'm going to have you hit M, and then hold Shift, click drag to make a square, right? And maybe what you're seeing is an outline, right? So maybe what you're seeing is only a black outline or a black line. So the way you could change that is if you look at the left, kind of the bottom area, it tells you the fill and the line, the outline of your shape. So there are, and that's like a way to easily change certain elements of your shape. So with my shape selected, I can either double click and that will pull up a color picker box and I can pick anything that I want here. Or I can just go for easy black and white, and you can see a little like right under, hard to not point, right under the square, you can see that there's like a black and white shape layered on top of it. And now my shape is filled with white. I hit Control Z to undo anything I did. See, now it's not, and now it is. And you can also see these arrows, right? And they flip the fill and the line of the shape, reversing it. Okay. I wanted to mention something else. Right, so if you hit Shift X when you select the shape, you can easily toggle, you can easily switch the fill and the line. So hit Shift X, Shift X, Shift X a bunch of times, and now it's kind of flashing, right? So we're gonna make a box, and the next thing I'm doing is I'm selecting that same box, and I'm clicking, holding Alt and Shift to make a copy and keep it at the exact same axis. Again, Alt makes a copy. So when I hit Alt, click and drag, I just made a copy easily. Copy, Alt, I'm holding Alt, click and drag, Control Z to undo that. And then if I want to make a copy, but keep it at the same axis. So you can see now it's locked at going horizontally, or it's locked at going vertically. And this is a way to kind of easily replicate things, make patterns, or keep things aligned very, very easily. So that's Alt Shift click drag to do that. Awesome. So now I have two boxes right next to each other. So I can select the second box, hitting Control D. Control D is a shortcut that will replicate action. So I hit Control D, and now I'm redoing what I just did. So it doesn't always work like that. So I'm hitting, clicking Alt and dragging, because let's say I moved my box a little bit to the left. Then when I hit D, it kind of just inches along, right? So the Control D only replicates an action that you did, and if you did something that you didn't want to replicate, then you're not going to be getting the desired result. So now I'm clicking and dragging to select all of my boxes, and you can see this little dotted box appearing, right? little dotted box appearing. So now what I've done, this little dotted box is selecting everything within that space. And now I've selected all of my boxes. I'm going to hit Shift. I'm going to click and drag. And right, what we said is when you click Shift and drag, you are scaling everything at an equal kind of proportion or an equal scale. So now I have a bunch of boxes, and I'm going to hit Shift X to reverse the fill. So now it's just an outline. And doing it a bunch of times. And now I have a row of boxes perfectly next to each other, perfectly square, and they're touching the edge of my artboard. And that's what I want. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to click, again, Alt, Shift, Drag, and I'm going to make another row. Oop, that didn't work. Again, drag over them to select all of them. Okay, sometimes when you let go of the keys, that's what I just did there. I let go of my keyboard shortcuts too early, and that kind of stopped the action I was trying to do. So it doesn't mean it's broken. It just means that you have to redo it. You hit Control Z and you redo it, making sure you're holding down the keys throughout the whole time you're trying to do that action. Okay, so now I have two boxes. Awesome. I'm gonna continue the process of kind of making a row, a kind of a grid of boxes. And I'm doing that by having my selection tool. I'm dragging that kind of thin dotted line over all of the elements I want to select, and I'm dragging it down. And we see this purple magenta, right? So that is the smart guides from Adobe Illustrator, letting us know that things are aligning. You can see it says intersect, and that is kind of an indication of what's going on. The way you so we haven't gone through all the drop-down menus yet, and there's a reason for it. But if you can't see it, it's really helpful to have your smart guides on. So if you can't see it, you can hit Control U to turn them on or off. So there's no indication if they're on or off. Nothing's gonna appear that tells you that they're off. But what you could do is go to the drop-down menu at the top left, right next to Window, right next to where we accessed that brushes window. So there's a drop-down menu called View next to Window, not Window, but next to Window. You hit View and you see a bunch of different options. And I encourage you to mess around, and I don't think you're gonna break this program. It's not gonna break. So that's how I learned a lot of what I know, is really just by clicking stuff and seeing what happens and what I could or couldn't do. And worst comes to worst, I just reset all of my settings. It's not that bad. Okay, so you see Smart Guides is checked off, but I could also uncheck it, which is what I just did, and now it's not checked. So that's how you know if you can't see those lines, you click that. Okay, so now we have this, now we have a bunch of boxes. So what I'm going to do is, considering that I don't have anything else in my space, I'm gonna hit Control A, which you might be familiar with from other programs. Control A selects everything. So it's not like dragging a box over the objects I want to select. Control A selects everything. And this is where, so now I have everything selected. I don't need to have to click them. So I'm going to go to my right, to kind of my Windows panel, and there's a bunch of different stuff. Also, I encourage you to open them and play with them, pull them out, close them out. You can always restore it with Windows, or go to Workspace, which is on the top right, kind of just reset it. Control E again. But we are going to make a layer. So you can see they're kind of like, how do we describe it? There are two gray triangles kind of stacked up on top of each other. If you hover over it, something will say layers. And I'm going to click that. Great. So now what we see is that all of our artwork, our artboard, our squares, they exist on a single layer. And this is, layers are really, really helpful in keeping us organized in Adobe Illustrator. So we have a layer. And right now what we're going to do is we're going to go to the bottom and we're going to see a little box with a plus. And when we hover over it, it tells us that that creates a new layer. So we want to do that. We want to create a new layer. Awesome. So now we have 2 layers. Someone asked, what's Control A? Control A selects everything on a page. That doesn't only exist in Adobe Illustrator, it exists in like Google Docs. If you have a bunch of text in Google Docs, you hit Control A, it will select all of the text in Google Docs. So that's just kind of like a universal shortcut for selecting all of the content in a single document. So now we have 2 different layers, and layers indicate that there's a top and a bottom. And the more layers you have, the more in between you have. And therefore, that can be really helpful when you're creating a poster, when you have something in the background and the foreground, when you have different effects, or maybe even you want to trace something, right? So it's very helpful. So what we're going to do is we're going to, first, when you put your mouse over layer 1, which is kind of the default name of a layer, you click it, and now we can see that it indicates that we can rename it. So I'm going to just rename it background, right? That's a little too long. I'm going to name it BG, right? So that's going to be our background. Great. So now we have 2 layers. But the thing is that even though we're on 2 layers, I can still edit anything on the bottom layer as long as I don't lock the bottom layer. So when I double click, not on the name area, on the not name area, it's kind of specific. I think you can't right click that. So I'm going to click kind of next to the name area, and a little layer options box pops up. Can you access it here? No. Okay, so I'm going to click that. A layer box and option box pops up, and it allows me to do a couple of things. First, it allows me to change the color of the layer. We're not going to get into that right now. But what I want to do specifically is that I want to turn my background layer, my BG layer, into a template. A template is Illustrator's way of naming like a layer that you, well, how about we check it off? When we check it off, it shows us that that layer is dimmed to 50%. I'm going to click, I see template, and I click OK. That's all I do. So what just changed? A couple of things changed. First, we have this little square option. That tells me that that layer is a template layer, which means that it's dimmed out. And it also means that for me, for my like organizational purposes, it tells me that that's the layer that I'm going to be doing artwork on top of. It's not necessarily my artwork layer or the layer where my design is going to live. So, and it locks it automatically. The way you unlock things is simply by clicking that lock box on, off, on, off, on, off. And right next to that, you can make a layer visible and invisible. Click it a ton of times. So maybe I don't want to see the content. I just hide it, and that's it. Okay, so now I have a top layer. I'm going to call it artwork. Okay, so now I have an artwork layer and a background layer. Awesome. And what you can see automatically is now I have this grid of squares that I don't have to do anything to, or I can't do anything to because that layer is locked. I can collapse my layers menu by hitting those kind of double arrows, and it disappears. You might have some confusion with something with the artboards layer, which is right under it. So I guess I don't know how to help besides learn the difference. But one is for organizing your layers, and one is organizing your artboards. Because you saw how easy it was to make an artboard, you can make a ton of artboards, and you can rename them. I think you could rename them. Yes, you could rename them. And you could reorganize them in different orientations. It's very helpful when you have a lot of things going on. Okay, so what we are going to do is we're going to make kind of a fun, simple pattern. So bear with me. I chose this exercise because I wanted you guys to I wanted to do something with you in which there's like a level of creative freedom. So the people who are maybe are very comfortable with this can move really quickly and kind of make their own version of things. And the people who are following along with me can, there's like a very low margin of risk kind of. Okay, so on top of, so now we're on our artwork layer and our background layer is locked. I'm going to hit M and I'm going to make another square. And we can see now that, right, so I have a square. I'm going to hit Shift X to move the color of my fill to the color of my line to the color of my fill. Great, right? I'm going to hit A to select a specific corner of my square. And right next to it, you see that little red circle? I'm going to drag that circle to the opposite corner, right? And this is the corner widget. That's what it's called. And it allows me to change the curvature of specific corners of a shape. So I'm going to drag it until I kind of maxed out the radius, the curvature of what this shape allows me to. And I'm just going to leave it at that. Okay, next, I'm going to hit M again, and I'm going to click and drag. I hope I'm not going too fast. I'm clicking, dragging, I'm making a rectangle. And now I'm holding Shift and Alt drag to drag that same rectangle next to each other. And we see our smart guides giving us some information about the position of our rectangle. And I'm going to replicate what I just did by hitting Control D. So hitting Control first, then hitting D. And every time I hit D, I replicate that action another time, right? So I keep my finger on Control, I hit D, and I can do this forever. I don't want to do that, so I'm going to hit Control Z. I think that I want my rectangles a little more narrow. So I'm going to, let's do that again. I'm going to hit V to get to my selection tool. I'm going to drag over all of the shapes that I want to include. And if I accidentally include a shape that I don't want to include, like this square that we already put down and curved, I'm going to hit Shift and click, and that will deselect that square. Now that I have all of my rectangles selected, I'm going to kind of squeeze them in just by dragging them, right? You can do that. Now that they're all selected, you can drag them in. And I'm going to make another copy of, I'm going to hit Shift, Alt, drag to make a copy of that rectangle. I'm going to hit Control D to do that one more time. I'm seeing some comments about people are a little lost. So the fact that we don't have live feedback means I can't give live instruction. So if you have feedback, if you're lost, if you could type out what you're lost, I can try to help and address it. But I'm not sure where you're lost in, but I do want to help you out. Okay, so now I kind of just want to make some vertical lines. So you can see when I hover over a shape, the lines come up. So I'm going to select that rectangle and I want to delete it because I kind of want like a row, what it looks like a row. So I'm going to delete that. Okay, someone is, okay, I'm going to get to that in a second. So we have a rectangle, I'm going to delete that, I'm going to delete that, and I'm going to delete that. Okay, there are 3 questions about how to make the rows of boxes. So sure, let's do that again. I know I said that I was going to address this every 10 minutes, but I kind of feel compelled to make sure everybody's on board. Okay, so I hope we all got how to make an artboard. So I'm going to make an artboard by hitting Shift-O, going to the artboard dropdown at the top, selecting tabloid. Okay, then I'm going to hit M. I'm going to go to the topmost left corner of my new artboard, and I'm going to, so the M brings up the rectangle tool. I'm going to hit M, go to that corner. It says intersect. That's good. That means that I'm making my my new shape is going to start all the way from that top right corner, which is what I want. So I click and then I hold Shift to make a square, right? So hit Shift and then drag, and you have the square. And then to make a copy, I'm going to click, hit Alt and Shift at the same time. That makes a copy. Okay. Click and drag. It's clicking and then moving your mouse. Clicking and then moving your finger or moving the mouse cursor. Okay, so now I want to make a bunch of different copies. So I'm going to select the shape I just copied. I'm going to hit, and then now in order to replicate that action of copying, I'm going to hit Control D. Control D, and every time I hit D, it replicates that action, right? So I don't have to click and drag every single time. Sorry, I just want to make sure that we have the same amount of boxes. So I want you to have the same format. Okay, so I'm hitting click, drag. I know it's it seems like a lot of steps, but it becomes muscle memory as we learn how to do it a bunch of times, which is why we're doing this exercise. Hitting Control D, and I just hit D. Every single time I hit D, it replicates that action, right? So now I have a row of boxes, and everything I just did works also on a vertical level. So now that, let's say I have a fill, right? I'm going to, again, click. So I'm clicking at one point, and then I'm dragging, clicking and dragging to select all of those elements. And now I have all these boxes selected. So like we did Shift, we did Alt, Shift, click, drag to replicate. I'm going to do the same thing until the purple line tells me that the edges of my copy and my original are meeting, right? So one more time, it's telling me that they're meeting. I hit Control D again, and every time I hit Control D, I replicate that action. So I'm hitting Control Z to undo what I just did. And then when I hit Control D, I copy it again and again, and this could go on. You can hit Control. When you hit Control and then hit D, you could go on forever. And if that entertains you, then go ahead. Okay, so let's go back to making this pattern. I'm going to lock my background layer again. Okay, so now we have this row of shapes. Give me one moment. Okay. Okay, so just because I think it might be a little boring to just look at black and white, what I think you should do is on the left, excuse me, on the left panel. How do I describe this? You're going to see, because everything is gray, it's hard to describe it. You're going to see the series of boxes, like 6 boxes stacked on top of each other. For me, it's third to the top. I don't know. I guess if you could bring attention to the Zoom screen. So what that does is bring up my swatches panel. Swatches is like kind of pre-decided squares of color. You can add your own colors to it. There are many different, obviously it's Illustrator, so there are a couple of different ways to use color in this program, but we're gonna use the kind of the most straightforward way possible, or what I believe is the most straightforward. And now we see all this color. When I select a shape, I can change the color just based on the box that I'm selecting. I can also double click on a box of color. Oops. Double click on a box of color and I have all of the different properties. I think that that's not something we need to do right now. So I am going to use a couple of colors that I already pre-selected, but feel free to use any of these colors that are already in here. If you're bored with these colors, which is quite a lot, so you can find more by going to the, I don't know how to describe it, but this kind of the furthest, most like bottom left corner of your swatches window, there's a whole large library of other colors categorized by foods, by nature, by scientific patterns, different kinds of patterns you have available, earth tones, etc. So I'm going to you can see that my imported colors already are put into my swatch library. So I'm going to select the shape I want to change the color, and I'm going to click the color that I want it to become. Does that make sense? Okay. Then I'm going to look at questions again in 7 minutes. So I just want to move through this for the benefit of the class. So I'm going to select my rectangles. I'm going to replicate that. Great. So now what I want to do is I want to create basically I want to create kind of a grid of a bunch of different shapes. And I want them to all be geometric. So if you feel like you have some comfortable handle on that, I encourage you to go ahead and do that. And I am going to move through this slowly. So I'm going to hit L to make a circle, and I'm going to hit Shift, click, and drag, which means drag like I'm moving my cursor or moving my mouse across a surface to kind of indicate that I'm pulling that point, the topmost point of my circle. And if it's not a perfect circle, it means you're not hitting Shift. So when you make the circle, you click, you hit Shift, and you drag to get a perfect circle. Okay, so that's what we have here. Hope. Yeah, that's what we have here. Now, let's say I want to make my circle brown. So, and another thing we can do is kind of using the things that we just learned, we can make a circle on top of a circle. So this time what I'm doing is I'm going to hit click, Alt, Shift, drag, and I'm making a circle on top of the one I already made. Oop, that didn't work. That didn't work again. Okay, I was wrong. If you want to, like with any like copy paste, right? So I select the circle, I Control C, and then if an Illustrator, if I want to paste an object on top of another object, I will hit, instead of Control V, which would just paste it anywhere, I'm going to hit Control F. So it doesn't look like anything just happened, but I just pasted a circle on top of a circle. So now we have, really there are two circles layered on top of each other. And I guess you need to remember that. So now I have these two circles. I'm going to change the color of this one to that white color that I have. And like we've been scaling shapes until now, I hit Alt, Shift, click, drag, and now I have a shape on top of another shape, right? This is one shape, this is another shape. But I still want to play around with that circle. I don't need to make a new shape just yet. So I'm going to select the circle by clicking on it. Then I'm going to hit, again, Alt, Shift, click, drag to make a copy and keep it going on a straight line, which is what I want. Then I'm going to click A, which gives me the direct selection tool, which allows me to select specific points and edit specific points. Again, when I hit V gives me like the general selector, and that doesn't really let me edit specific points. When I hit A, it's kind of like a more refined tool, and it does. So I'm going to have hit A, and I'm going to hover over the, if you can see what I'm doing, I'm not sure exactly how to describe this, the right middle side of my shape. And it says anchor, and there's like a purple box pops up. I'm going to click that, and now it tells me that I have selected it, okay? Another way you could do this is you could just use your direct selection tool to kind of make a selector box over the area where that kind of the middle, that side of it, the right middle side of it is. Select over it, and I'm gonna hit delete. Boom. Now what I've done is I've deleted that point, which contained those curves. So now I have kind of like a half a circle, and it's missing some points. I'm going to check the questions and answer in 2 minutes. Okay, so now I'm going to hit Shift. I'm going to hit Shift to move it again at the same line. I'm not trying to copy it, so I'm not going to click Alt. Alt copies it. I don't want to copy it. I'm just going to move it by holding Shift. Great, awesome. So now I have kind of this half a circle, and we make a copy again by hitting Alt, Shift, click, drag. We select the object we want to copy, and now we have kind of these two halves of the circle touching each other. A little too much brown for me, so I'm going to change the color. Okay. Okay, cool. Okay, the next thing we can do is I'm going to select my circle again. I'm going to select my circle, and I'm going to click Alt, Shift, click, drag, and move it on a vertical axis. So like when I click and drag to move it horizontally, I move my mouse horizontally. I'm moving my fingers horizontally. When I want to move it vertically, I move my mouse vertically, like that. So Alt, Shift, click, drag, and I'm moving it vertically. That's what I'm doing. I'm moving it vertically. And the cool thing about smart guides, is that it will tell me that I have lined up perfectly with that grid of squares that I wanted to create. Just for reference, this is something that I made this morning. Okay. Right, this is something I made this morning using this grid, and it's just a bunch of like different shapes layered on top of each other using the exact techniques that I'm going through now. I'm going at a slower pace because I want to make sure that everyone is on board. So I guess I could leave it here. If anyone wants, I don't know, to copy it or to understand kind of what I'm driving at here. Okay. Okay, how do you replicate something? So there's a way to copy an object, and then there's copying an action. Someone said I'm going too fast. So if you want me to repeat something, let me know and I'll repeat it. I'm not sure. It's hard to kind of gauge while I'm doing something how other people are receiving it. So your comments are basically the only reactions I have to what we're doing. Okay, so to replicate something, there's the kind of a copy paste, which means you're just copying an object. So I can click on the circle, I hit Control C, just like in any other program, Control V, and it copies it. But it doesn't copy it to a specific place. It just copies it anywhere on the artboard. It could be completely out of kind of my screen, out of my field of vision. So I'm going to select that. I'm going to delete it. If I want to copy an action, so that means that let's say I Control C, Control V, and then I hit Control D, and that will move it kind of anywhere, because it kind of just copies exactly what I did in that action. So it's not a very smart feature. It can't tell what I'm trying to do. It would only copy what I've already doing. Okay, and someone said, how do you delete half a circle? I select the circle. I select A for a direct selection tool. So there's a selection tool and a direct selection tool. It's kind of like two sides of a coin. One is very general capabilities and one is very specific capabilities. So I'm going to select A, and I'm going to kind of select the right side of that circle, right? So the right side of that circle. And then it will tell me that it was selected. Let me zoom in there so we have good, you can see what's going on. Let me even move it a little so we can see better. You can see that little purple box, I'm clicking Control plus to zoom all the way in, and Control minus to zoom all the way out. Control plus, zoom in, Control minus to zoom out. Okay, so I'm selected it and that box is filled in. I select it, it says anchor, so I know that that's the point I want to edit, and I hit delete. Boom, now I have a half a circle. To copy something to get the same thing in a line, A. Okay, I'm going to go one more. I'm going to go over that point one more, and then I'm going to move on to the other steps. To get things in a line, you first have to kind of copy them in a line. And the way you do that is by selecting your circle. Well, I'm selecting my circle. I'm clicking. I'm holding Alt and Shift at the same time, everything at the same time. So it's a little bit of a technique involved. I'm clicking and I'm holding Alt and Shift, click, and then I'm dragging. I want to drag it horizontally. So I'm going to drag it horizontally until the smart guides, those purple lines, tell me that they're touching edge to edge. And so now I have two circles touching each other. Now, when I want to copy an action, I hit Control D, D, and every time I hit Control D, it copies it. Hope that explained it. Okay. So I'm going to walk through kind of recreating certain elements of this. Okay. I'll move that, it's a little distracting. for me. Okay. So the same way you edit a circle, you edit a square or any other shape. So I'm going to make a square, which is, we've done that a few times already. I have a square. I click M to bring up the rectangle option. I click, I hold Shift, then I click and drag to pull up that shape. And then the guides will tell me, right, it says path, that tells me that it's kind of connecting with another path, which is what I want in this instance. It's telling me that it's connecting with the points. It's meeting the points of my square grid that I have in the back. And then I'm going to click A. When I click A, it gives me this white arrow versus when I click V, I get a black arrow. A, V, A, V, A, V. When I click V and I select a point, I can't edit specific points. If I delete it, I delete the whole shape. But what if I only want to delete a specific point? I click A, and then I can either go directly to the corner, and there's a point directly at the corner, and either I select it or I make kind of a selection box, and I click delete to delete that corner, just like we did with the circle. So now we kind of have this right angle triangle. So so the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to hit Alt, Shift, click, drag again. Not what I wanted to do. I'm going to do Control C, Control F to make a copy of an object and paste it on top of itself. That's what I want to do. Then I'm going to click. I'm going to click it. This is it's not really tricky. If I was trying to get it perfect, I would probably use a different process. But right now, all I'm doing is I'm selecting that copy. Right, so I made a copy. So if you don't make a copy, then it's like that, right? So I have a kind of my bottom triangle, and then I have the top one. So I'm selecting the top one, and what I want to do is kind of have it sit, at the center of this area, the hypotenuse. No. Okay, so basically what I want to do is have a bunch of triangles kind of on top of each other. So you can see here, and I'm going to replicate that action exactly, Control C, Control F. I'm going to move it until the guides kind of indicate to me. Let me zoom in so you see, right? You see, what's going on? I don't know why. They stopped telling me what's going on. Here, right. You can see, I don't know why, at different zoom kind of distances, different information is provided. So I'm going there, and I'm trying to get it kind of to sit similar to, at a similar point to the previous triangle. And now I kind of have this interesting kind of pattern, very simple pattern going on, right? The brown is making me a little nervous, so I'm going to change it. Okay. We have 20 minutes left, and okay, if there are any outstanding questions that I haven't addressed and that would be helpful to address in class, please post them again so that I could address them. If it's a question that might be answered, like I can answer after class via email, that's good as well. So I guess you use your judgment to decide what you're going to include. Okay, so what other elements should we create? I'm just going to, again, select L to make an ellipse or a circle. And I'm just going to click and drag. I'm not trying to make a perfect circle. I'm actually trying to make an oval. So I'm just clicking and dragging till it looks like it touches the other point. I let go, and now I have an oval. And I want to make 3 ovals on top of each other. So I'm going to hit Alt, Shift, click, drag. And that purple line tells me, the smart guides tells me that did not work. Right, the smart guide tells me that they're touching edge to edge. That's exactly what I want. Then I'm going to select that second oval that I just dragged again, Control D, to replicate that action. So now I have 3 ovals stacked on top of each other, touching edge to edge. Let's do that one more time, okay? So Alt, Shift, click, drag to make a perfect copy directly beneath it. And then select that second shape, Control D to replicate it. Then I'm going to, with my selection tool, not my direct selection tool, so my black arrow, I'm going to select only the ovals, and I'm going to drag it just like that, just hovering over the edge and seeing that kind of double facing arrow. I'm gonna drag it up and drag it down so it meets the bounds of that box. Awesome. Okay, so now that I have it, I don't know, let's give the color. I'm holding Shift to move it along a strict horizontal axis. A square and a circle. Okay, so when I hit M, I hold Shift down on my keyboard. M, hold Shift down on my keyboard, click, drag, I have a square. And then if I want to make a circle, I hit L, Shift, click, drag. Square, circle. How do you round a corner of a square? Awesome. Okay, that's a great question. So I have a square over here, and when I select it, I see these little circles on the inside, right? I see the little circles on the inside. And if I selected just even one of, so this might be a little confusing. I select the square, right? Then if I'm still in my black arrow selection mode and I hover over one of the circles, it will show me that little curve, which tells me that I'm about to engage the corner widget tool. If I drag that towards the center of the square, right, I'm pulling the edges, the corners of the square into itself, and I pull it and I just continue dragging, I have a circle. Does that make sense? Ooh. There you go. Right? Now, what if I wanted to select one corner? I hit A for the direct selection tool, or go to the top left toolbar, and you're going to see these 2 arrows. One's white and one's kind of just an outline. So when I hit A and I select a corner of a circle, now I have the option to only edit the corner of a single, the roundness of a single corner. So now I do the same thing. I pull towards the other side. I'm pulling, it's almost like I'm pulling the corner towards me, pulling it back, right? And so now I've rounded it completely. That's how we do that. Okay, so we have 15 minutes, and I'm going to move through. I'm going to kind of copy some of the things that I did over there. Okay, so now I'm selecting L. I'm making a circle, a small circle. Zoom in, Control+ to zoom in. Now I select my circle, and I like to have like an element of consistency. between in my design. So I want my circles, I'm going to kind of create a grid of dots, but I want there to be equal space. So I'll show you, that'll make sense in a second. I made a circle, another circle, and now I am dragging the first circle to the other side of the second one, right? So let's do that again. Click, drag to do that, to have two circles next to each other, touching edge to edge. Then I will move my first circle, holding Shift, Alt, click, drag, and now I have, what you'll see here is when I hit Control D, I moved it at a space the exact size of itself. Is that a little confusing? Maybe. I hope it's not. Right. So now when I delete this, I have circles that are circles that are equal distance, and then I use my direct selection tool to select all of them. I hover over the corner, right? I have these double arrows. I hold Shift to scale them at a similar size. And now I'm going to do a very kind of a similar process going vertically. So I'm going to make a row, kind of like a filler row. I'm going to go to this might be a little complicated. I'll go through it quickly. I'm going to go to the top row, Shift, click, Alt, drag, oops. Right, and now they're touching edge to edge, and now when I hit Control D, they're at an equal distance. Okay, I made an extra row. I didn't want to make this. So now I kind of have like this kind of dot pattern. Lots of circles, lots of circles in this today. Okay, so now let's say I want to do the similar thing, but with squares. So I'm going to take, let's do it over here so it's not confusing. Click M, Shift, click, drag. Now I have like this perfect square. And then I'm going to click Shift, click Alt, drag to, well, I don't have to click, okay, I'm a little confused. I Shift, click, Alt, drag to make a copy, and then move, make another copy of the first one. I know it sounds really confusing, but now I have the equal distance of the square between itself, and it's kind of satisfying to look at. So when I select all of the squares, I now have, what I'm going to be doing is making a checkerboard pattern. I don't see any other questions in the space. So I'm going to assume either everyone's figured it out or resigned themselves to not knowing what's going on. When I hit Alt, now I'm just making a copy. I'm not trying to lock it onto a vertical or horizontal axis. So now I'm going to select my square. I'm going to duplicate a few items. Okay, let's do that right now. I can use my my selection tool to kind of drag, see this dotted box. You kind of see that when you are playing around on your desktop screen, right? This little box. So I'm going to, just like you select items in a folder on a computer, excuse me. E. Berencina, I don't understand your last question. So if I want to copy these items, I will just Shift, click, Shift, Alt, click, drag to then copy them, just like I would duplicate a singular item. And then I would hit Control D to copy that action, right? So there's an item and then there's an action. And I kind of have these horizontal lines. MA, I don't understand your question. How do I make them all fit in? You're gonna have to be more explicit. Okay, so let's say I want to make a checkerboard pattern, right? So I'm going to take this, And the smart guides will tell me kind of when it's lining up, right? You see that? Let's zoom in. I'm going to select that, hit Alt to just make a copy, to just duplicate it when I drag. So now this is telling me that I'm duplicating it. I'm just like, ooh, perfect, right? It's telling me intersect, the points are meeting. Perfect, awesome. So now I have this kind of second row. I'm going to Alt, Shift, click, drag, another copy, select that, Control D to replicate it. See where I'm going with this? But I don't want to keep on making rows, right? So I'm going to select all of that. Right, do we understand that? Select all of it, Alt, Shift, click, drag. If the order is not important, it's more that they have to be done simultaneously. I'm dragging it down and I see these kind of lines coming up telling me that we're meeting points, right? Control minus to zoom out, Control D to make a copy. Right, so now we have this checkerboard pattern. Oh, right. Okay, so that's what we did. How do I minimize them into a square? Well, I don't think I understand that question. How do I make them fit into a square in the grid? Okay, so let's say this was really big, right? And like not fitting in a specific square. I have my black arrow, I drag over all of the shapes I want to resize. And then I go to the corner, right? And we see this kind of diagonal double facing arrow. I hit Shift to maintain the sizes, because if I don't hit Shift, it's going to change. See how they're squashed now? They're not squares. So I'm saying to the program, I want to keep them squares. I just want them to be smaller. So we hit Shift, click like that. That's exactly what you want to see. And now I'm moving it and just dragging it kind of towards the space I want it to fit in. It's kind of intuitive in that way. I'm moving it to where I want it to go, right? Inwards. And obviously Control Z will go back so you can undo it. Okay. What shall we do next? So I'm going to copy these. I'm going to copy these two circles that I did before that I copied on top of each other. I'm copying them by selecting both of them, kind of dragging. I don't have to drag over the whole thing because that's also going to select other shapes outside of it. What I can do is drag just through the center, and that will select the shape in the middle and the larger one as well. Oops. Okay, so now we're doing Alt, Shift, click, drag. I'm copying it over here. Oops, didn't work. I let go of Alt too soon, and so it didn't make a copy, right? So that kind of a little muscle sensitivity to knowing when to let go. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to do this kind of interesting kind of splash effect. So what I did was I selected the inner circle, hold Shift, and I just drag it. And then see that smart guide, the purple line, it's letting me know, hey, you reached an edge of an object. That's like, oh, that's the object that I want to reach the edge of. So now I want to kind of make this effect, and I'm going to Control C and then Control F to make a copy on top of another copy. Let's see if there's a simple way to do this. No. How about I'm just going to make this, I'm just going to make the larger shape smaller. So I'm holding Shift, going to the edge around the middle, right, until I see those double facing arrows. Boom. So now I have this kind of, ooh, that is a little too far out. Control C, Control F. Oh, what did I just do? I don't know what just happened there. I'm dragging out. Let's redo this. I'm going to shift, drag this point to the edge, and then Control C, Control F to make a copy on top of itself. I'm going to drag that point in, and let's just give it a color just so we can differentiate between the two. Control C, Control F with that smaller circle. Move that in, give that a different color. Now I kind of have this interesting effect. Okay, so there are 4 minutes left. I am going to, I don't know if there's something I can teach. I'm just gonna kind of redo a couple of things. What I wanted to close with is, first of all, I wanted everyone, make sure everyone got my email. So, okay, that's my email. Email me. Make sure to include some hint of what your question is in the subject line, and make sure your questions are clear. I'm not going to try to guess so much what you're trying to say, because it could really be anything. So try to be like very as detailed as possible about what your problem is. If you're frustrated about something, also let me know that, and let me know what you're frustrated about, and let me know how I can fix that. Learning online could definitely be tough, and the downside to having the downside to this is that you can't like pause me. So sorry. But yeah, so I guess you can just ask questions, and I will try to be as articulate as possible while also moving us along at a comfortable pace. Sorry about that noise. Okay, so we want to recolor something. If you hit I, so you hit I on your keyboard, you have a little eyedropper tool, kind of like the thing that you would give kids medicine with. And so if you hover over a shape, you will kind of well, okay. Here are the steps to that. And I'm kind of squeezing this in at the end, and I'm sorry about that. So you select the shape, right? A big shape, then select the shape, and then I hit I. When I hit I, I'm now able to sample color from anywhere on my artboard, right? So I'm going to, let's say, hover over this half a circle. I'm going to click on it, and my circle that I selected before, has now kind of taken that color from the other shape. So that's kind of cool. And let's say I hit I by accident and I don't want to select a color of anything. I hit escape, which is at the top left corner of my keyboard. Hit escape. And I'm wrong. You don't hit escape. You hit V. You hit V to go back to. So you hit I for the eyedropper tool. You hit V to go back to your standard direct selection tool. Okay, awesome. So that was this class. Next class, I think, is going to be another Illustrator class. And I'm going to try to fit as much Illustrator lessons as I can. I imagine that some of you may have like a free trial, so I want you to get a taste of what Illustrator is as much as you can. We are going to be using Illustrator throughout the entire course, so it's not like we're only using it for 2 classes, but if your choice is to not pay for it, that's your choice. And this class was not, there's no barrier to entry. So if you want to participate without having the program, that's totally fine. And you will learn something valuable. It will definitely be valuable. It just may not be as valuable as it could be. So with that, I'm going to close out for today. Thanks for joining us. Good night.